Additional aids and services are available to individuals with disabilities. To make such a request, please contact us by email, by clicking the Help tab in the PD portal, or at pdportal@tamu.edu, by phone, including Relay Texas at 1-800-441-7323, or in writing to Train PD, PD Portal Support, 4477 TAMU, College Station, Texas 77843. Both a transcript and accessible document of the content presented in this webinar can be found as resources in the course description. Click on the blue links under Course Resources in the description. When a link is clicked, a new browser window will open.
So welcome everybody to Workforce Wednesday. Today our session is Know Your Rights, and our presenter today is Monica Holtkamp. And my name is Olga Escamilla, and I'm your host. And at this time, I want to welcome our presenter, Monica Holtkamp. So a little bit about Monica. Monica Ortiz Holtkamp is a licensed master social worker and Department of Justice accredited representative. Monica has worked with Baker Ripley for 6 years and co-leads the program as a senior manager of the Baker Ripley Immigration of Citizenship Program. Monica has a passion to provide resources and information to vulnerable community members. And this Know Your Rights presentation is information that we share with our neighbors and community partners to best support their knowledge and understanding of their rights.
Thank you so much, Olga, and thank you so much to everyone who is joining us today. It's my pleasure to be here. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Just to give a little bit more information about myself before we get kicked off here. I've worked at Baker Ripley for 6 years now, and I first started at Baker Ripley as a hotline specialist. So our team, when I first started at Baker Ripley 6 years ago, was 5 people. We've now grown to be upwards of 18. We're still in the process of hiring, but we've grown quite a bit. And part of our initial implementation and work was growing out our Know Your Rights platform, our immigrants' rights hotline. So this is work that we're very passionate about, and we love to partner with different organizations to be able to provide this to our communities. We do have it available in Spanish. So today we'll go through it in English, but in any of your prospective sites where you need someone to come out and share information such as this, it can also be tailored to specific community questions that are coming through. Sometimes you all are the first line of questions that are happening. So you may know of a topic that has the community in stress that we can cover, or if there is something that's missing on the presentation that you say, I'm getting lots of questions about, we're happy to make those integrations within this as well. So our safety and family preparedness plan is our Know Your Rights one-on-one. And this is, like I mentioned, something that's geared based on community questions that we've received through our office, through our immigrants' rights hotline, and now through our community partnerships as well. And so the first question that we often get is surrounding DACA. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. A lot of the questions that we receive are from parents. And so usually it's a mom calling our hotline and saying, my child has DACA status. Is there a route to permanent residency? Is there a route for us to be able to become a citizen? The answer is maybe. So oftentimes what we like to do is that we're going to recommend that everyone get a legal assessment. And the reason why we're going to suggest that is because DACA is, as the title states, a deferred action. It is not a permanent solution for individuals that have DACA eligibility, because it doesn't lead to a status of permanent residency. It is a temporary status. And so what we often share with families is getting a full legal assessment is so important, because there might be other avenues. What if your adult child is married to a United States citizen? Perhaps there is a route that they can take that could lead to a permanent status. But unfortunately, right now, DACA is not a permanent status. It is something that if you are already a DACA recipient, that you're eligible to renew every 2 years. It's not a quick or a cheap process. It means that every 2 years, they are renewing at $495 for their renewal. That allows them to receive a work permit. And the work permit, again, is only valid through the time that it is indicated on their card for a 2-year period. And then I get questions a lot on whether or not they can travel with that temporary status. The answer is complicated as well, only because the status of DACA is currently being challenged in the state of Texas. So often what I tell my own clients is, if you would like to travel with what is called an advanced parole travel document, we would want to assess the reason why. Is there a reason that is a humanitarian need that we can ask USCIS for your permission to leave the country? It's not easily granted, and there's a risk. Right now, the current litigation, if for any reason DACA status were to be canceled during the time that you leave the country, it puts you at risk of not being able to return. So we often tell families, unless there's a crucial need to travel outside when you have a temporary status, we oftentimes will have to give bad news of saying it's not the right time right now, and these are the risks and the reasons why. Ultimately, we give the autonomy to the individual and the client. If it is their choice to still apply for it, absolutely, knowing what the risks are that go behind it. And just to give a little bit more of a background on what advanced parole is, it can take up to a year to process a travel document, and you do have to provide proof to the government that there is a humanitarian need for you to leave the country. And those aren't often easy to prove cases. The other added layer is that oftentimes the need is for family emergencies. If they know that there's something that they want to travel to out of the country for, it's because they want to see a loved one who is maybe sick. Unfortunately, these travel permits take upwards of about a year to really process through USCIS, and lots of things can happen within a year, unfortunately. So just to give a little bit of an overview, as I mentioned, work permits are valid for 2 years through the expiration date. And we actually at this time are recommending that people start renewing their DACA work permits 6 months in advance, because the processing times with immigration office can be lengthy. We often recommend that they do them with enough time so that it does not impact their ability to work. So unfortunately, another question I get is, my DACA's already expired, can I continue to work? Unfortunately, it is up to the employer, and oftentimes it is not allowed because they are required to have a valid work permit in order to seek employment. So unfortunately, if they are caught with very limited timing to renew, and it's taking 6 months before they can get a new work permit, they potentially could be without employment during that time frame. So we do recommend that our families and individuals start 6 months in advance so that they don't run into those long processing times. I do also get challenges financially. As I mentioned, this process takes $495 to renew every 2 years. And this can be quite challenging for families, especially throughout the pandemic, to be able to save money, if especially they have multiple family members that are applying for DACA. And so we do at times have scholarships available for individuals who let us know that they need financial assistance. This is not all the time. We do have generous community grants that have been provided to support this need specifically. But I always encourage anyone who is in need to ask, because it doesn't hurt to ask. It could be during that time frame where we do have it available and we're happy to provide it. And so another big question we get is surrounding SB4. And SB4 is Senate Bill 4 that allows for law enforcement to stop. What questions we receive about this specifically is whether or not a police officer can stop us to ask whether or not we have immigration status. The answer is no. They should not stop you and ask only for your immigration status. However, they can stop you for a routine traffic citation. If you run a red light, you absolutely can get stopped. And what we recommend our community members is to be honest with whoever's pulling them over and provide any identification that they have available to them. What we have heard both from the community and from conversations that we've had with law enforcement is oftentimes they are not going to arrest someone just for running a light or a stop sign. Often what happens is that there is something that has caused them to be stopped. So they're speeding. So what we say is make sure that you provide documentation of identification. We don't want to resist giving information. But if someone is asking you what your immigration status is, you can respectfully ask why they're asking that question. This is an empowerment component as well, because obviously there's a power dynamic that we have to address with our community and letting them know that yes, you can provide your identification. Yes, they are within their right to ask you for your identification. They are not within the right to ask you what your immigration status. They might be able to defer that, obviously, based on the documentation that you provide, but you can still be issued a ticket. So we do ask our community to be as cooperative as they can and to ask questions and empower them when they're able to as well. Thankfully, what we've heard from community members based on this is that they're not really being asked what their immigration status is. And so this again goes back to an empowerment component and just an information for them to know that they have the right to ask the question as to why they're being asked that, or maybe even why they were pulled over, because it could be that they just genuinely don't know why they were pulled over. We do let them know what the risk of driving without a driver's license is, and that's part of our consultation when community members come to us so that they are aware. But one of the things we don't want to do is tell people to not drive because they have families and they need to go drop them off at school, but also education around what the risks are in doing so. Another question that we get quite often, and I'm sure you as service providers get this as well, is public charge. Public charge is something that was implemented to really assess for people who are consular processing into the United States as to whether or not they have the financial means to support themselves once they become lawful permanent residents and adjust to become citizens here in the United States. This is something that only applies to a very small amount of people. And obviously before and in previous administrations, there was a lot of fear around asking for public benefits. It was actually really scrutinized during previous administrations. Now that we have changed, President Biden has announced that it is not going to impact the way that it was previously. So when someone comes into our office and says, am I a public charge? If me asking for public benefits, food stamps, Medicaid, will that impact my household in any kind of way? Again, the answer is maybe. We always advise, if you believe that you have a concern about public charge, seek out a legal consultation. They're free. We can do a full assessment of what that might look like for you and your specific circumstance. But I would say at least 90% of people who ask the question, it does not qualify to. One of the things that we don't want to happen is that families, especially families with children, are not asking for the benefits that they need for their families because they're afraid of the public charge rule. And so we always go over how someone qualifies for a benefit and what eligibility requirements are around that, and that they should honestly and openly be answering the questions about what eligibility is for their household. So what is your income level? Is your child a United States citizen? Because that child could have been born here. Therefore, they do qualify for some benefits. And so we kind of go through those different tiers of questions with them. And one of the biggest things that also came from this is that we really implemented this conversation when we incorporated social services within our program. So we are an immigration legal services program, but we are also a social work program because our team works together in both elements. And so a lot of the things that we do internally is we fill out the SNAP application for families. We fill out TANF applications. We fill out applications for Gold Card. And those questions all come with, am I eligible for these benefits? And we can answer those questions for them internally and apply for them internally. So that also removes a layer of fear around public charge. And so one of the things that we have really thought through is how to prepare families in the event of an emergency. We serve a large population in our Office of Asylum Seekers. In the event that you are detained without status, meaning that they have no formal legal status here in the United States, what can you do to make sure that your family is safe and that they understand how to go about the different processes in a calm and informed way? And so one of the things that we have done is we've actually sat and changed this quite a few times, depending on feedback that we're receiving from the community. And so if we're thinking about the family preparedness, it takes into account both the individual and the children in the household as well. So we always talk to them about arranging temporary caretakers for United States citizen children, any children in the household, and also any vulnerable adults. So if you know that you have an elderly adult that's living with you, a young child that's living with you, who could be the caretaker in the event that you were not available to care for this child or adult? And then we also have in the past for our family preparedness conversations also invited partners from Lone Star Legal Aid to do direct documentation that would give power of attorney to someone. That's not always available to everybody. So also what we say is start writing out a list of people that are in your life that can be trusted individuals that you could quickly say they have power of attorney or they have the right to make decisions about my family or my children in the event that I'm not available. And so that might look like a notarized letter. That might look like you are reaching out to the school districts to let them know these are the people that are on the list. This is a copy of their identification, and they have the ability to pick up my children in the event of an emergency. That's always number one for us, because it's sometimes something we don't think about ahead of time is in an emergency at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon when pickup time is happening, will there be someone to pick up my child so that they're not alone there? Creating a box of important documents. One of the things that we're seeing a lot, especially recently, is that law enforcement at the border has been taking original documentation away from someone when they're being processed by CBP. What we're recommending is that families and individuals, and for them to share with their community members as well, making copies of everything, even if it's not an original document, it can still be a copy, because trying to get a copy from home country can be incredibly difficult or expensive. Having multiple copies, even laminated versions of it, could be really helpful to be able to store in a box. Phone numbers of any individuals that have access to the box so that they know. We even recommend that they go through an exercise with their family members on, if an emergency, show me where the box is, pick it up, feel it, feel how heavy it is, ask me questions about the documents that are in it. And sometimes that involves going through it on a basic level with young children, going over it at a higher level with teenagers and adults, but so that they have some familiarity with what those documents are in the box. If they're asked for a birth certificate, do you have that? Yes, actually, I do, and I know exactly where to find it. And it doesn't have to be a traumatic experience. It could just be an informational exercise that parents take together with their family and their loved ones, just so that they know how to react in the event of an emergency. Also, empowerment component for the individuals who might be experiencing this emergency, how to react to law enforcement. We always try to tell everyone, please, as best as possible, take a deep breath and remain calm, because there are certain things that you can go through to make sure that they are being approached by the right person. So, for example, we have had community members that have been subpoenaed and it's the wrong individual. So they're looking for someone who maybe formerly lived at an address, but they're no longer living there. So it's also looking and empowering the community members to look through the subpoena that's being provided to them and making sure that the name on the subpoena is correct, that they understand that the address listed on there is correct. And if any of those components are missing or incorrect, they can kindly tell the officer that that's not the right location. That's not the person. Show identification. And then lastly, they have to have that document signed by a judge. And that is something that's super important for them to know, because if it is not signed by a judge, you don't need to even open the door. They need to go back and go through the proper processes in order to speak to that individual lawfully. This can be incredibly difficult. So we have even practiced with community members that we're working with on this Know Your Rights portion, for them just to do a mock conversation. Like, how would you talk to an officer? Would it be through your window? Would it be through your door? And what we recommend is that all documentation that are legal documents be slid under the door. And so they can review it with themselves before they open the door. Once they're in your door, they have the right to stay there. And it's even harder to call representation if you need it. Obviously, once you review, if it is you and you need to open the door, then going through the steps of taking care of all of these extra elements that we just went through on how to prepare their family for it. It's also knowing what your eligibility is. So if you have not sought out consultation with an attorney, it is important to take that step now so that you have the knowledge and background of what you may be eligible for through the immigration process. And that way, if that you are questioned about things, you know exactly what to answer, and you have the guidance of an attorney, and also you know who to call in the event that something were to happen. Pro bono attorney and pro bono representation in Houston does have wait time. So we always let the community know it's great to have nonprofits on file, but it is also great to have an attorney that's a private attorney that could also be more responsive or faster, depending on what the timeline and the wait time looks like for the different nonprofits here in Houston. There is an initiative called the ILSF, which is the Immigration Legal Services Fund, that does support families who have loved ones that are in detention or removal proceedings. And we'll go over that slide towards the end, but it gives you information on how to make a referral to that program. It is first come, first serve. It is a wonderful resource because it does allow for attorneys to go directly to the detention facilities and provide legal representation for free. The need is tremendous here in Houston. We're a border state, so our numbers are very, very high, but it's still a good resource nonetheless. So we do encourage families that even if there is a little bit of a wait time, to go ahead and add that recommendation through that portal as well. So this is the checklist of documentations that we give to our families. We have a picture of a box here, but what I always recommend is don't put it in a box that could be destroyed. Find something that's pretty sturdy, that's maybe even weatherproof, so that these documents don't get destroyed. We live in Houston, there are floods. We always caution families, like, just make sure that this is in a safe location, that you have multiple versions of this. Maybe you have a box in your home, maybe you have a box at your neighbor's, maybe you have a box somewhere else. So there should not just be one place that you can find these documents. In the event of an emergency, you may need to leave quickly. And in order to make sure that you have access to different components of your box, it's preferred that you have at least two versions of this. So your children's birth certificates are important, passports, social security cards, and again, power of attorney or authorization. One of the things that I do caution families about is that a lot of what is submitted to immigration officers or asked by them, they don't accept anything in Spanish. So I also recommend that all of these documents, if they are in Spanish, to be translated into English. And there's several recommendations that we provide families of places that can do it. We normally do not refer any families to go to notarios. It has been a huge issue within our community that many of them go to notarios for immigration legal service support, because it is very popular and it's actually legal in Latino America that notarios are attorneys in those countries. But unfortunately, notarios are not attorneys here in the United States, and they're not authorized to practice law. So unfortunately, there's still kind of that misunderstanding that notarios can maybe help with certain legal aspects of their cases. We do caution them about that, because we have had cases where somebody goes to a notario, they thought that their application was submitted, and then unfortunately that was not actually processed or submitted. They never got a receipt. So they have to start the process all over again. And in some cases, immigration does create timelines. So you have to apply for certain relief at a certain time. And that creates challenges and barriers for community if they don't know that there are those due dates for different things. We also ask that if anybody is a survivor of domestic violence or any crimes, that they have protective orders available in those boxes as well, that they make law enforcement aware of them. Especially if there's any child custody documentation. If you know that there's an emergency, who's the backup person? If you don't have a custody order in place, would you like your children and loved ones to go to your partner or ex-spouse? And so then we have a list of medications as well, because it is very difficult to get your medications refilled quickly if you don't have your doctor's information on file, if you don't have prescription information on file, and it's also incredibly expensive. And so one of the things that we do share with families is, if you do know that you have medication needs, asthma inhalers, things like that, making sure that you have a copy of your prescription in there, so that if anyone needs it, they can quickly go get that filled at the pharmacy in an urgency. Also having important phone numbers on hand and making sure more than anything that those phone numbers are up to date. So sometimes we might have numbers of nonprofits, and a lot of nonprofit phone numbers will change from year to year depending on if they're a long established nonprofit, if they're a new nonprofit, but always making sure that whatever phone numbers that you leave on hand are up-to-date phone numbers. So best practice for us internally, even through our program, if we're providing resources to the community every 6 months, we're checking to see if those phone numbers are still working, if our point of contact is still the same. And sometimes they do switch out quite often. It just depends on the organization and entity. So I share that with families so that they are aware that maybe the point of contact that they had 6 months ago may not be the point of contact that they have now. So keeping that list up to date is super important. And so we heavily, again, emphasize childcare because many of our families that we serve come with small children. So it was really important to them to have the resources and the knowledge behind how to make sure that they had someone that was legally able to care for their children. So that can look different ways. So we do, again, partner with Lone Star Legal Aid to do the power of attorney documentation. But also if they're not able to go to Lone Star Legal Aid to get that documentation in place, just having a simple notarized document that states that this person has the right to take my child to seek out medical care, that they have the right to take my elderly parent to seek out medical care. All of those components are going to be needed in order to enroll children in school, to take them to their medical needs, and just honestly, as something as easy as enrolling them in a different school program if that child needs to move with another person. If the other parent is not available, then it might require moving school districts or moving schools completely. And that was something that really triggered us to make sure that they had the resources that they needed for this. Another big question we were getting was how to react to a raid. So sometimes we have had individuals who were at work minding their own business, and there was just this huge raid. It wasn't targeting any specific individual, maybe the organization itself, but what should we do in the event that law enforcement shows up? Again, it kind of goes back to take a deep breath and stay calm. We always recommend that they not run away from law enforcement, because as soon as you start running, they may think that you're doing something wrong or that you're hiding something. We always recommend that our community has some sort of identification on them. And that can be challenging for undocumented community members because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of their documentation is stripped from them at the border when they're being processed by CBP. So getting a passport from home country is incredibly expensive. One of the newest initiatives here in Houston is that they're trying to advance what's called the Advanced Library Card. So the Houston Public Library is offering an identification that has a picture, an address on it, and it's essentially will serve as an ID if you need it here in Houston. It has not been fully approved to be accepted as a formal identification here in the state of Texas, but San Antonio has adopted it within their city. And that is something that we're hoping that Houston will fight for as well, because that would make a huge difference for our families that do not have ID at the moment. So we let them know, if you have identification, show it. If not, sign up for the Advanced Library Card. At least it'll have your picture ID, your address, and your name on it. And then let them know, if it is a situation where they're at your house, that's different than if you're at work, right? So if you're at work, don't run, show identification, and then kind of go through the different areas that we've already addressed. Where's your emergency contact? Making sure that you have access to your phone so that you can call your attorney, and kind of going through those different steps. If they're at your home, we always recommend that you first ask for the warrant, have the officer slide it under your door, and then you review that warrant. So as practice, when we do this with the community, is we have a copy of what a warrant should look like. We let them look at it, and we have them point out the errors to us, because if it's missing your name or it has the wrong person's name on it, again, slide it back over. There's no one here by that name. My name is X, and they don't have to open the door. If the warrant is not signed by a judge, again, they have the right to ask, can you please have the judge sign it? And then we can speak to you. And so we kind of go through that exercise with them as both an educational component, but also an advocacy component so that they're aware of what they have the right to do and hopefully have less fear around asking for it. The warrants often do have mistakes. Either it's the name, spelling, the date of birth, different areas. So it's really important to be able to look at the document, be comfortable in looking at it. And again, it's all in English. They don't provide warrants in Spanish. So we also train the community that it's not language accessible. So it is unfortunately a barrier for them to be able to understand what their rights are because they are not being issued documentation that is in their native language. We do still let them know that if it is all correct and you have to let them in, then you have the right to remain silent. But also, if you have loved ones or children in the home, you have the right to also ask them to please allow you to call whomever is going to take care of your loved ones. I would say the majority have allowed. They don't want to go through the motions of having to call Child Protective Services, which is what happens if they don't have anybody to watch over their children. So we do let them know you have the right to ask to call your neighbor or someone else to care for your family, because it is easier for them to be able to locate their family and communicate with them afterwards. And then highlighted here at the bottom and all in caps, rightfully so, is we do recommend that no one sign any documentation. Because all of these documents are in English, you don't really know what you're signing if you can't really read it, and they're not required to give you any documentation in Spanish. So it is important to have someone that's either an attorney, accredited representative, look over those documents before you agree to something that you may not necessarily know that you're agreeing to.
What can employers or AEL providers do if they're being rated to protect their employees or their students?
I think that if it comes to the organization, I would ask the officers. Obviously, we always want to be calm in the situation, but it's okay for us as organizers to ask to see the legal documentation. And if you have in-house counsel, ask for your in-house counsel to be able to review those documents. So for us at Baker Ripley, we have in-house counsel that if an ICE officer were to show up, we would ask that we see the documentation before they have access to any of our facilities. So as soon as they walk in through the front door, our PA staff, our frontline staff that is aware of the programming that we provide here at Baker Ripley, we let them know is if anybody comes in that presents themselves, and they'll present themselves as ICE officers, and they have their badge, they'll show their badge. And it's never happened, thankfully, at our location or at any of Baker Ripley locations. But if they were to show up, we have trained them to say, let me put you in a room. We're going to call our managers. And that's when they would probably call myself or Josephine, my partner, and they'd ask us to meet with them. So depending on what their need was, we'd ask them for that documentation, alert our in-house counsel, but ultimately she would let us kind of make that decision as to whether or not they would need to move forward. It is very unlikely that they would show up at a community center or at employers. They target very specific businesses during braids. And the reason that I think that they would not target any kind of nonprofits or community centers is because they don't want to be on the news. They would not want to be at a place where we're serving community members and they're targeting. That would create more fear, but also create a lot more tension between organizations and law enforcement. And I think that they would not do that, not to mention that it's against the law. So if that situation were to arise where somebody was at your classes, I would definitely have somebody review documentation at the front desk, not allowing access to your different facilities until you know the reason why. So it's always okay to ask them, let me see what that warrant looks like as the provider and the establishment of the organization or the owner, and saying, you don't have access to my classes. This is not something that we need to lawfully give you access to. And I'm happy to get you connected with our leadership to further discuss. And I think that's okay to say, because it's not a personal address that they're targeting, right? Like they're not targeting someone's whole home address or maybe they got a tip of people somewhere. That's not our community centers. Those are not the places that we serve.
What if there is no in-house counsel? What is our recourse?
I think that if you have a situation where someone's coming into your facility, do you have a front desk or do they directly have access to your classroom spaces? Because they would need to present legal documentation to enter any facility. So if you have someone who's a receptionist or someone who checks in at the front desk, then it would be important to have them trained on asking questions like, let me get my manager. And this is very similar to a crisis situation, right? So how would somebody at the front desk, a frontline worker, be able to respond to a crisis management situation? Because you wouldn't want that person to say, oh, hey, Monica, I have this. I need to go to the back to go to the classroom spaces. That person at the front desk should say, no, right now I can let you into our waiting area. Maybe there's a private space that she can escort the person to. And then someone from management should really take the step of going to meet with that person and really assessing what their need is, looking over whatever documentation there is. And similarly, if there is a warrant for something, you should thoroughly look through it, highlight what their need is, and not allow access, because it's not just an individual they're asking. In the scenario that you're providing, it's a classroom. It's not a public space. So they should definitely not be entering your classroom spaces. And you're really that protection if you don't have in-house counsel of being able to assess what their need is. I am more than certain that would not be happening, but in the event that that does happen, I think you as individuals here learning, you have the right to ask for that documentation before you allow access. And I honestly, as an advocate myself, would, even if they had a warrant, would not allow anybody access to different spaces here at Baker Ripley.
Raids at organizations or establishments are not legal?
It depends on the warrant. So it all goes back to that legal documentation. So if they just show up at a place of employment without a warrant, that's an issue. Why are you targeting this place? They can be seeking one individual, and that doesn't happen often either. So I think there's this misconception that, people are just getting targeted left and right, but it doesn't happen like that. It's usually someone who has unfortunately had encounters with law enforcement in the past. Those are usually target audiences, especially under the Biden administration, whereas previous administrations may have targeted all immigrants. Really, what they're trying to target is enforcement on individuals who have had a crime in their past that are labeled as terrorists. And unfortunately, we don't know those different situations because we may not know the background of the individual. But it's not often that you would have a raid just on a random place like you would see on TV. That's false narrative. It doesn't happen. You have to have a warrant and a reason to arrest somebody, as you would any citizen of the United States. So it's not unique to our immigrant communities. You have to have a warrant even for a U.S. citizen. So the same applies. You have to have legal documentation that proves the need. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a partnership with the Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative, and we were able to get funding approved by the Harris County Commissioner's Court to fund the Immigrant Legal Services Fund. And so the Immigration Legal Services Fund is geared towards individuals that have been detained and are in removal proceedings. So it does provide free legal services and representation. It is a first come, first serve, and it is Harris County based, which is unfortunately a barrier for some families, but it could be, there's twofold. So it is Harris County based, but if the person intends to reside in Harris County after they are released, they can still qualify for this service. So we always want people to still call and be assessed as to whether or not they can apply for this, because it is open to many more people, even though they don't currently live in Harris County. We're pushing our state, we're pushing our Houston mayor to extend this through advocacy, through cohorts that we're working on. But unfortunately, right now, this funding is only available for Harris County residents. And I know many of you work out in the Conroe area. They do have to provide information about their household income and be under the 80% AMI for Houston. but many of our families are already struggling financially. So this has not been a barrier or access. Really, what I've heard from the community is the Harris County zip code has been the biggest barrier, and we're happy to help kind of assess. There's a link here at the bottom left. This link is directly links to the portal where you can create a referral. You can also change the language on the referral. So this is open for anybody. The community can input their referrals on their own, and it is language friendly. So if they choose any language, it'll completely translate the form for them so they have the ability to fill it out. They can also call the Immigrants' Rights Hotline, which is a collaborative through the Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative. This is the 1-833 number here at the bottom. This is manned Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And this is a good resource to provide for anyone who has questions about immigration policy or updates so that they can receive that information quickly. A lot of the people who are on the hotline are DOJ accredited representatives that can give legal information quickly over the phone and provide resources. It's not led by an attorney. So I think that's also kind of been a misconception, is that they can get an attorney on the phone right away. Unfortunately, I don't have very many attorneys that have that kind of availability, but they can get basic legal information on here that can be provided to them.
Do you know if there are services like this in other parts of the state?
I know that there are several in San Antonio, Austin. The bigger cities is where you're going to find the majority of the resources. I know I have talked to San Antonio quite a bit, and they have some amazing things happening to support immigrant communities in San Antonio. They were actually the first to pilot the advanced library card that we're trying to model here in Houston. So there are resources all over the state of Texas. The 1-833 number at the bottom here, they provide Houston, but they have a list of Texas resources as well. So they can definitely call. This is our Baker Ripley information. So we always try to be as accessible and transparent about how to get our consultations. We do open them up on a monthly basis. They do fill up in a 24-hour period. We open them up month to month. And this is just Houston based. We don't represent outside of Houston, unfortunately. We hope we can get there at some point. But I do think that if you need even a list of resources for other cities around the Houston area, we're happy to give recommendations as well. And so we have our phone number listed on here, our Baker Ripley website. And then we do on our website list out the different types of consultations that we provide and whether or not we have openings and attorney capacity. So there's different types of cases: family-based immigration, citizenship. We do a lot of asylum work through our office, and that is actually something that we're growing out this year. So those appointments fill up the fastest, but we still let community members know when consults will open for the following month, just in case they do get filled up rather quickly. I let them know it's only a month wait. So hopefully if you don't get in this month, try again the following month. The fastest way is always through our website, because that's what everyone utilizes to get scheduled. And it's also open to providers to use. So if you have a community member who's sitting right in front of you and says, I really need a citizenship consultation, I'm already a lawful permanent resident. Awesome. You can go on the website really quickly and get them registered for a consultation right then and there. They don't even have to call the line, but they're more than welcome to. And then we also have walk-in friendly days: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We have 3 locations, and it is quite a drive for some families. But one of the things that I do share is it would still be of benefit to be able to kind of navigate those processes with an immigration attorney, even if it is a bit of a drive. Our consults are all over the phone, so that hopefully removes one visit in which they have to come to the office. And then if we are moving forward with the case and signing a legal contract, then they do come in person. We go over what the steps are and then what next steps we need to take to fill out the application. We do a lot of workshops. So we do have workshops that we offer for DACA recipients, for TPS, temporary protective status, asylum seekers, citizenship forums throughout the year. So there's different models that we do depending on what the need is. And that can change year after year depending on what immigration policy looks like. And then this is a list of our collaboratives. So as I mentioned, we're part of what's called the Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative. This is all Houston nonprofits that offer immigration legal services. We can't do this work alone. We always say we're a very small but mighty team. Out of our team of 13, we have 6 legal representatives. So it's important for us to be able to talk to our different partners to see what everyone has capacity to do, and so that we can appropriately leverage the time that we have and the capacity that we have. So if I can't take one case type, maybe I can share it with my Catholic Charities partner and say they have capacity. I just talked to them last week. And so we do often meet together so that we can kind of share what we are all doing and what that capacity looks like here in Houston. And then this is a slide for the Immigrants' Rights Hotline. As I mentioned at the beginning, I started Baker Ripley when this was first a pilot 6 years ago. So I'm excited to see how much it's evolved and grown throughout the years. But any of the things that we covered today on the presentation can definitely be shared as well over the phone through the Immigrants' Rights Hotline. They also have little cards that have all of these Know Your Rights information on a little card that people can have in their wallets. If you're interested in receiving some of those, you can also connect with them through the hotline to talk about how to receive some of those cards for your prospective organizations and your classes as well. We know that sometimes, especially in our rural cities that are outside of Houston, it's much harder to receive access to services. So we are happy to help provide resources in the different regions that you might be in.
We hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded webinar. After you have passed the final test with a score of 80% or greater and have received your certificate of completion, please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. Participant feedback helps Train PD at TCAL continue to provide high-quality professional development. To leave a course feedback, please go to the completed portion of your transcript. To do this, hover over the My Learning tab and select View Your Transcript. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the word Active and select Completed. Then, click Evaluate in the drop-down menu next to the course you just completed. Please note that your feedback is greatly appreciated.